Get ready for an inner journey that doesn't begin with words, but with the invisible synapses that light up behind every thought. This is the space where science meets the soul, where neuroscience bows before emotion, not to deny it, but to explain it. In this first part, we'll cross the bridge between brain and behavior together, descending into the invisible roots that determine who we are when we love, fear, react, or fall silent. Understanding the brain is not just a technical matter, it's an act of compassion. Because when you understand why you act the way you do, why you feel the way you feel, you stop blaming yourself and start taking care of yourself. It all begins with an organ weighing about 3 pounds, made up of over 86 billion neurons, each connected to thousands of others through synapses that exchange messages at a speed no technology has ever truly replicated. But this isn't just a technical fact. It's living proof that you are a pulsing living plastic network, a system that doesn't just react to the world, it transforms through it. Every experience you've ever had, a compliment, a rejection, a trauma, a hug, has physically shaped the structure of your brain. This means memories aren't just recollections, they're neural trails, and each time you relive a pain or reinforce a thought, you walk that same path again, like stepping on the same ground until it becomes a road. That's why repeating patterns isn't just a matter of choice, it's also biology. Understanding this changes everything, because when you realize that your automatic behaviors, like avoiding tough conversations, giving in to fear, shying away from affection, or bursting in anger, don't come out of nowhere but are the result of neural structures reinforced over years, you begin to see clearly that healing isn't a switch, it's a journey, a deep relearning process that takes time, patience, and safety. Many people stay trapped in cycles of guilt because they can't change all at once. But the brain doesn't work like that. It's like a field where new paths must be carved out with persistence, presence, and repetition. For example, when you face a situation that triggers your anxiety, like a criticism, a delay, a confrontation, your brain activates its alarm system led by the amygdala, a small structure responsible for detecting threats. The amygdala doesn't analyze, it reacts. It releases cortisol, speeds up your heart, tenses your muscles, and puts you on alert. Only later, and more slowly, does the prefrontal cortex step in to interpret the situation rationally. But if your brain has been conditioned by past experiences of pain, abandonment, or violence, that rational interpretation may never come, because the limbic system has already decided it's dangerous. Run, fight, hide, go silent. That's why you often feel out of control, because in truth, a part of your brain is trying to protect you, even if that means repeating behaviors that now bring you pain. This is the contradiction of human behavior. We try to avoid suffering, but end up creating emotional armor that keeps us trapped. And this is where psychotherapy comes in. Because when you talk about yourself in a safe space, without judgment, with someone who truly listens, you begin to activate brain regions connected to self-regulation, compassion, and emotional reprocessing. This isn't poetry, it's neuroscience. Healing is literal. Compassionate listening changes the brain. From this point forward, everything shifts. You begin to understand that you're not weak for feeling too much, nor wrong for reacting intensely. Your brain is telling a story that began before you had words. Maybe it began in childhood, with emotionally unavailable parents, with silent traumas, with absences that left no marks on your body, but deeply altered your brain's circuits. Maybe it was shaped by a culture that demands constant strength, that silences tears, that shames vulnerability. But now, you are here, and that matters, because the very act of seeking understanding is already creating new connections. You are reprogramming yourself as you listen, so don't rush, don't demand perfection. The brain needs repetition to learn, but it also needs rest to integrate, and most importantly, it needs affection to flourish. It's no coincidence that the same brain regions activated during love, touch, and empathy are also the ones that regulate fear, pain, and stress. Affection heals, affection rebuilds. Affection is the most fertile ground for the human brain, and you can offer that to yourself today. You are not your symptom, you are not your anxiety, your fear, your impulsiveness, or your apathy. You are the whole system. And within you, there are circuits that haven't yet been activated, potentials you haven't yet accessed, versions of yourself that are still silent, but alive. And that silence is the invitation. Will you listen? Imagine that. At the center of your brain, well protected by the most ancient evolutionary layers of your mind, there is a kind of primitive sentinel. It doesn't think. It doesn't weigh options. It doesn't wait for logical explanations. It has only one function: to keep you alive at any cost. This instinctive core, known as the limbic system, is the epicenter of your most intense and automatic emotions. It's here that the amygdala detects danger, real or imagined, with incredible speed, faster than it takes you to realize what's happening. And it's within this ancient mechanism that many of our deepest emotional conflicts begin. The amygdala doesn't hold conversations. It acts. When it senses something threatening, it sets off a chemical alarm that floods your entire body. Your heart races, breathing becomes shallow, muscles tense, your stomach tightens, and the world seems to narrow. This is what we call the fight or flight response, a legacy of our evolutionary past, when threats had teeth and claws. Today, that predator might be a boss, a partner, a midnight email, or a notification you haven't even read, but your brain already spirals into collapse. And here's the key. For the limbic system, what matters is not reality but the perception of threat. That's why we often feel like hostages to emotions that seem disproportionate. A mild critique feels like an attack. A delay feels like abandonment. A mistake triggers a spiral of shame and self-deprecation. And it's not because you're overly sensitive or fragile. It's because your brain learned at some point that these things were dangerous. And when that learning is rooted in trauma, neglect, or toxic family dynamics, the limbic system begins to fire constant alarms, as if living in a permanent war zone. This state is known as emotional hyperactivation, and it may underlie many modern symptoms: chronic anxiety, irritability, exhaustion, insomnia, and even autoimmune disorders. But there is real hope, and it's called the prefrontal cortex. Located at the front of the brain, this is the part responsible for thinking before acting, planning, evaluating, feeling empathy, and regulating impulses. It's your inner adult, the voice that says, breathe, slow down, think. The challenge is that when the amygdala becomes too activated, the prefrontal cortex temporarily shuts down. It's as if reason gets knocked over by emotion in milliseconds. And so you react automatically. You yell without meaning to. You shut down suddenly. You avoid tough conversations. You self-sabotage. But this is not your failure. This is survival mode kicking in. And understanding this is the first step toward freedom. The good news is that the brain is not a destination. It's a process. And over time, it's possible to strengthen the connections between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. Through therapy, safe listening, emotional journaling, meditation, conscious breathing, nature, physical activity, and real affection, you can literally teach your brain to feel safe again. And when there is safety, the amygdala calms down, the body relaxes, thought becomes clearer, life regains its color, shape, and direction. That's why, before changing a behavior, it's often necessary to calm the nervous system. You won't be able to have a hard conversation if your brain is in alarm mode. You won't make wise decisions under pressure, and you won't be able to love yourself deeply while your body is bracing for the next blow. Emotional safety is not a luxury. It's a prerequisite for any deep transformation, and that applies to relationships, career, self-esteem, and health. Now pause for a moment and observe. How is your body right now? Is there tension in your jaw, your shoulders, your breath? This isn't just physical. This is your brain trying to handle the world. You may have been in alert mode for so long you no longer notice, but your body remembers. And healing begins when you start to listen to those signals, because the limbic system doesn't understand words, but it understands presence, touch, silence, and care. And all of that, subtle as it may seem, starts teaching your brain that it can let its guard down. This is how rewiring begins, not through grand revolutions, but through small reconnections. It's okay to feel this. You are safe now. You can rest. And believe it. When you offer that to yourself consistently, your brain learns. Fear gives way to trust. Reactivity softens into choice. And you realize that it was never just about controlling emotions. It was about understanding the circuits behind them and reprogramming them with love. There are wounds that leave no visible scars, but echo silently through decisions, fears, and patterns that repeat without explanation. These wounds have a name: emotional trauma, and they don't have to be great catastrophes to leave deep marks. Sometimes a look of disdain, constant absence, a childhood without affection, or the repetition of small daily aggressions is enough for the brain to learn one powerful lesson: the world is not safe. And from that moment on, everything changes. The nervous system shifts into defense mode. The body contracts, the mind fragments, and life begins to be lived as if it were hostile territory. But what few people know, and what neuroscience has already proven, is that the brain can heal. And this process is called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to adapt, reorganize, and form new connections throughout life. For a long time, it was believed that brain circuits were fixed, unchangeable after childhood. But today we know that transformative experiences, such as genuine therapeutic listening, a secure bond, a meditative practice, or even a new understanding of oneself, can literally reshape the brain. This means that even after years of living in dysfunctional patterns, you can learn to respond differently. You can cultivate a new inner narrative, one based not on fear, but on presence, not on lack, but on worthiness. And this isn't magic, it's emotional biology. But why does trauma have so much power? Because it isn't stored like a linear story. It's kept as a raw emotional and bodily sensation, lodged in the limbic system and in deep brain regions like the brainstem. This means that many people cannot explain their trauma, but they feel its effects in the form of anxiety, panic, reactivity, addictions, emotional disconnection, or even physical illness. The rational mind tries to move forward, but the body still lives as if the threat is present, as if danger never left. And until that is recognized, the brain will continue to react in the same way, reinforcing the same protective circuits. This is where psychotherapy becomes a vital tool. In a therapy session, when you are invited to name what you felt, to retell your story with safety and meaning, the brain begins to integrate fragmented memory. Over time, the nervous system learns that the pain belongs to the past, and that now a new present is being built. It may sound subtle, but it's transformative, because in that process you are not just venting. You are literally rewriting your neural biography. You are telling your brain, "I survived, and now I can live." Moreover, recent studies show that techniques like EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, somatic therapy, CBT, and mindfulness have proven effects on the reconnection between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. In other words, they help the brain reorganize emotionally. Practices like conscious breathing, gratitude, positive visualization, and meditation activate the vagus nerve and restore balance between the sympathetic system, fight or flight, and the parasympathetic system, rest and digest. This means that even in moments of chaos, it is possible to guide your body back to a state of safety and presence. But this transformation doesn't happen in a rush. Trauma requires time, repetition, and most of all, compassion. You cannot heal what is still denied, silenced, or treated with shame. That's why the first step in healing is acknowledgement, saying, "Yes, that hurt. Yes, that affected me. Yes, I react this way because one day I had to protect myself." And by saying that, you begin to create a new internal space. A space where pain isn't in control but is heard, where the past doesn't define but is integrated, where fear doesn't paralyze but is understood. You don't need to force yourself to forget. The brain doesn't need to erase the pain to move on. It needs to rewrite the meaning of pain, and that is possible. It's possible to transform a wound into wisdom, a memory into strength, a scar into a foundation. Because neuroplasticity is not just a scientific concept, it's proof that you are greater than what hurt you. And when that truth is lived, it becomes freedom. So if today you feel broken, remember, you are actually in the process of rebuilding. And each held tear, each deep breath, each insight in therapy is a new brick in that path of rebirth. Your brain doesn't just want to protect you, it wants to set you free. And it all begins when you allow your story to be told, with truth, with safety, and with presence. Have you ever wondered why on some days everything seems to flow with ease and clarity, while on others, just getting out of bed feels like a Herculean task? The answer doesn't lie only in external circumstances. It often lies in the invisible messengers circulating inside your brain, neurotransmitters. Substances like dopamine, serotonin, and cortisol act as the orchestrators of your energy, mood, focus, and even the way you relate to yourself and others. Understanding how these elements work is a giant step towards self-awareness and, above all, self-compassion. Let's start with dopamine, the molecule of motivation and reward. Every time you anticipate something pleasurable, a compliment, a success, a hug, good news, your brain releases dopamine. It's what pushes you to act, to set goals, to seek achievement. However, the dopamine system is highly sensitive to repetition and intensity. In today's digital world where likes, notifications, instant shopping, and non-stop stimulation are one click away, the brain begins to crave short bursts of pleasure. As a result, it loses sensitivity to life's simpler, natural joys. You may feel like nothing is exciting anymore, that pleasure has become rare, and motivation vanishes, for no apparent reason. This is called anhedonia, and it's closely tied to the burnout of dopamine circuits. Alongside dopamine is serotonin, a neurotransmitter that acts as a mood stabilizer, regulating sleep, appetite, digestion, and overall well-being. Low levels of serotonin are linked to depression, irritability, insomnia, and chronic distress. But unlike dopamine, which responds to desire and achievement, serotonin is boosted by feelings of safety and belonging. It increases with sunlight exposure, physical touch, gratitude, emotional connection, and healthy nutrition. That's why emotional healing isn't just about positive thinking. It requires concrete actions that nourish the brain from within. A walk outside, a heartfelt hug, a meaningful conversation. These are forms of biological therapy. But there's another player, often overlooked, that silently governs your states of alertness and exhaustion: cortisol. Known as the stress hormone, cortisol is essential for your survival. It helps you respond in emergencies by boosting alertness and energy. However, when its release becomes chronic due to constant worry, emotional overload, conflict, or digital hyperconnectivity, the effects are devastating. Too much cortisol damages brain areas responsible for memory, disrupts sleep, weakens the immune system, and blocks serotonin production. That's why chronic stress can lead to depression, anxiety, and even physical illness. What's most concerning is that most people today live in a constant state of cortisol activation without even realizing it. They wake up checking messages, spend the day reacting to external stimuli, stack tasks without breaks, and at night try to rest with an overstimulated mind. This cycle depletes the nervous system. The body behaves as if it's constantly bracing for a threat that never arrives and therefore never goes away. Therapy offers a way out. It's an invitation to pause the automatic flow, reconnect with the body, name your emotions, and allow the nervous system to slowly find a new rhythm. And there's more. The balance between these neurotransmitters doesn't depend solely on genetics. It's also shaped by your lifestyle, your relationships, your diet, your sleep habits, and your ability to listen to yourself. You don't have to be a prisoner of your brain chemistry. On the contrary, by understanding how it works, you gain the power to make more conscious choices. Small daily changes, like regulating sleep patterns, reducing digital stimulation before bed, exercising, nurturing real human connections, and building mindful pauses, are enough to deeply modulate your neurochemical state. This also explains why psychotherapy has such lasting effects. By speaking, processing, reflecting, and feeling truly heard, your brain activates a cascade of neurotransmitters linked to well-being. The therapeutic relationship, when safe and consistent, becomes a biochemical field of emotional reorganization. Affection is transformative. Listening reshapes brain structures, and touch, even symbolic, even virtual, can activate sensations of comfort that echo far beyond the session. You may have never thought about it this way, but what you feel has a physical basis. Sadness, anxiety, anger, apathy all have chemical signatures, and by understanding this, you stop blaming yourself for not handling things and start treating yourself as someone going through a legitimate imbalance. It's not weakness, it's not laziness, it's your brain asking for help. And the good news is, the brain listens and responds. With repetition, intention, and care, it begins to rebalance itself. Neuroscience confirms what the heart has always known: affection, presence, and deep listening heal from the inside out, from cell to cell, from thought to thought. Have you ever promised yourself that you would change? That you would never fall into the same pattern again? That you would be different, calmer, stronger, healthier, more loving? And just days later, found yourself repeating it all over again. This cycle, as common as it is painful, is not a sign of weakness. It's the result of the architecture of habit in the human brain. Because change isn't just a rational decision. It's a neural dispute, a battle between old circuits reinforced by repetition and new connections that haven't yet gained enough strength to stand on their own. And this silent daily battle happens inside you every time you try to do something differently. The brain loves shortcuts. It's a system designed to save energy. That's why when you repeat a behavior many times, even if it harms you, the brain creates an automatic loop. This habit loop consists of 3 stages: trigger, routine, and reward. The trigger is what initiates the behavior, such as stress, loneliness, or fear. The routine is your response, like eating, avoiding, yelling, or withdrawing. The reward is the immediate feeling of relief, control, or pleasure. Over time, this loop strengthens into a neural path, and any attempt to break it feels like going against the current. That's why willpower is rarely enough. It requires a lot of energy from the prefrontal cortex, the rational part of the brain. But this region quickly depletes in the face of strong emotions, fatigue, or mental overload. When that happens, the brain defaults to its old patterns, like instinctively taking the road it knows best. Then come the guilt, the frustration, and the false belief that you'll never change. But neuroscience says otherwise. Every habit can be reprogrammed, as long as the new path receives repetition, consistency, and above all, compassion. Yes, compassion. Because when trying to change a habit, you'll often meet internal resistance, self-sabotage, relapses. If you treat those relapses harshly, your brain associates change with pain and retreats to the old pattern for protection. But if you respond with kindness, telling yourself, "It's okay, this is part of the process," you send a new signal. Change is safe. And that already begins to reshape your brain's perception. The habit then stops being a war and becomes a path of reconnection with your true self. The key is to identify the triggers, create new conscious routines, and most importantly, replace destructive rewards with healthy, sustainable ones. A simple example: if your trigger is anxiety and your routine is binge eating, the goal isn't just to stop eating, but to offer a new response that soothes the body and mind, like a walk, relaxing music, or a comforting conversation. By repeating this new circuit, even if it's hard at first, your brain begins to learn. Neurons reorganize, repetition becomes a trail, and the trail, over time, becomes a road. There's also an emotional component to habits. Identity. Often we don't change because deep down we still identify with the old pattern. I'm anxious, I'm explosive, I'm disorganized. These phrases reinforce the old circuit and create an invisible ceiling over who you believe you can be. But what if you started saying, "I'm learning to be calmer, I'm practicing presence, I'm developing clarity"? Language shapes the brain. The way you define yourself sets the tone for your transformation. And the more gentle you are with yourself, the safer your brain feels to change. That's why therapy is so powerful in the habit change process, because it offers a safe space for conscious repetition, where the new can emerge without judgment, without hurry, without pressure. A place where you can fail, try again, understand the pattern, and find meaning to move forward. True change doesn't happen in a scream. It happens in silence, in the space between impulse and response. In the subtle choice you make 1 second before repeating the automatic, and that space, when nurtured, expands. So next time you feel like you're failing by repeating an old habit, remember, this is not failure. It's your brain showing you where the pain still lives, where the old path is still stronger. And that is not the end, that is the beginning, because now you're aware, and awareness is the first brick of lasting change. We live in an age where silence has become a luxury, and stillness, an almost unbearable challenge. The human brain, shaped over millennia to detect danger in the wild and process natural stimuli, now finds itself immersed in a digital jungle of notifications, sounds, lights, short videos, endless feeds, red alerts, and dopamine promises at every swipe. It is the era of the overstimulated brain, the time of invisible exhaustion, the time when we are always on, but almost never present. And the cost is deep, though not always immediately visible. Mental fatigue, diffuse anxiety, difficulty concentrating, insomnia, irritability, and a loss of the ability to feel pleasure. What we are experiencing is a global neurobehavioral experiment. Never in the history of humanity has a generation been exposed to so many simultaneous stimuli for so long from such an early age. Flashing screens, never-ending videos, images that refresh faster than the brain can process. It's no surprise that people's average attention span has plummeted. It's no surprise we constantly feel tired, even when we haven't done that much. What wears us out isn't just what we do. It's the sheer volume of decisions, micro-stimuli, and comparisons the brain is forced to process every minute. To the nervous system, this avalanche of stimulation feels like constant alert mode. Every notification triggers a small dopamine release. Every novelty gives a tiny spike of pleasure. But over time, the reward circuit begins to wear down. What once excited now feels dull. The mind demands more stimulation to feel the same effect. This creates a vicious cycle of hyperconnection and emptiness. The more we consume, the less satisfied we feel. And the less satisfied we feel, the more we seek stimulation, until life starts to feel flat and silence terrifying. There's also the factor of constant comparison. Social media, by showing only curated highlights of other people's lives, creates the illusion that everyone else is happier, more successful, more productive, or more loved. This activates brain regions linked to self-worth and social belonging, but in a negative way. The result is the silent erosion of self-esteem. And this doesn't happen because we're weak. It happens because the human brain has always been wired to seek social acceptance as a survival strategy. The problem is that now that quest happens in an artificial environment where no one shows pain, doubt, or failure. Continuous screen exposure also disrupts our circadian rhythm, the biological clock that regulates sleep, appetite, mood, and cellular regeneration. Blue light from screens inhibits melatonin production, disturbing deep sleep. And without quality sleep, the brain loses its ability to consolidate memories, regulate emotions, and maintain neurochemical balance. In other words, the simple act of using your phone before bed might be sabotaging your mental health in ways you don't even realize. That's why so many wake up already tired, already anxious, not because the day will be hard, but because the body wasn't able to restore itself overnight. But this isn't about demonizing technology. It's a tool, a bridge, a possibility. What's at stake is how we relate to it. And that relationship can and should be healed. It starts with awareness, with the realization that your time, your attention, and your peace of mind are precious resources. And you can set healthy boundaries, usage hours, digital breaks, detox days, reconnection rituals. You can transform your phone from a silent enemy into a conscious ally. You can make technology serve your health instead of the other way around. In therapy, many patients report a constant feeling of wasting time, as if there's an invisible urgency to produce, respond, keep up, not fall behind. This urgency has a name: cognitive overload. The brain is so used to being stimulated that when silence finally arrives, it goes into withdrawal. This is real, but also reversible. Through consistent practices of presence, returning to the body, rediscovering deep reading, slow conversations, creative boredom. Everything that slows you down heals. Everything that requires full attention reorganizes. So if you feel increasingly distracted, anxious, or overwhelmed, know this: it's not you, it's the environment shaping you. And the first step to escaping it isn't guilt, it's protection. Create islands of silence in your day. Choose not to reply instantly. Breathe before clicking. Listen to your body before opening the app. The brain wasn't built for this pace, but it is adaptable. And you can guide that adaptation with intention. You don't need to run from technology. You simply need to relearn how to be with it without losing yourself. And that relearning is possible. It begins the moment you choose to close your eyes, quiet the noise around you and ask, what truly nourishes me right now? Imagine that each therapy session is like sitting in front of an invisible mirror, a mirror that doesn't reflect your appearance, but your patterns, fears, beliefs, and traumas that shape the way you exist. Now imagine that every word spoken, every shared silence, every held or released tear during that encounter doesn't disappear when the session ends. On the contrary, they physically modify your brain. This is not a metaphor, it's neuroscience. Psychotherapy is, demonstrably, a process of neural reconfiguration, where new connections are formed, old wounds are reorganized, and chronic suffering patterns are gradually unlearned through safety, connection, and conscious integration. What makes therapy so powerful isn't just the conversation, it's the quality of presence within that dialogue. In a fast, reactive, and superficial world, the therapeutic space offers something rare, a place where someone listens to you with total attention without interrupting, correcting, or judging. And when you are truly heard, your brain begins to activate areas of the prefrontal cortex responsible for self-reflection, empathy, and perspective-taking. At the same time, regions of the limbic system, such as the amygdala and hippocampus, begin to reinterpret old memories, easing the emotional weight attached to traumatic events. It's as if, by being heard with respect, you learn to listen to yourself with more compassion. This effect goes beyond words. Neuroimaging studies have shown that during psychotherapy, visible changes occur in the brain's structure. People with depression, for example, show increased activity in areas linked to pleasure and motivation after just a few weeks of therapy. Individuals with anxiety disorders demonstrate reduced amygdala hyperactivity, meaning less emotional reactivity to triggers. People with histories of complex trauma, when received in deep and consistent therapeutic relationships, are able to recover parts of themselves frozen in defensive states, moving toward a sense of integration and internal control. And the most remarkable part is that these effects are not fleeting. They accumulate over time like drops carving stone. Each session is a drop, a new neural path, a new possibility for response. When you begin to name your emotions, to identify automatic thoughts, to understand the roots of certain impulses, you are literally rewriting the way your brain interprets the world. Therapy is perception training, a ritual of reorganization, a rehearsal for new ways of being, until those ways are no longer effort, but nature. There's more. The therapeutic bond serves as a corrective relational model. For many people, childhood was shaped by unstable, abusive, absent, or dysfunctional relationships. The therapist then becomes a new reference point, someone who is present without intruding, who listens without invalidating, who cares without demanding, who holds space without trying to fix. This bond, when consistent, repairs early emotional injuries, teaching the brain that it is possible to trust, to open up, to build intimacy, and to receive affection without fear. It's as if therapy teaches the body and mind that emotional safety exists in the world and that it can be cultivated, even if it was never there before. So when you get emotional in a session, you are not being fragile. You are being neuroplastically active. You are opening doors inside yourself that have been locked for years. When you express something you've never said to anyone before, your brain registers it as a milestone. When you finally understand the root of a repetitive behavior, a new neural network forms, enabling choice. When you are validated, heard, and understood, even in your contradictions, your brain learns it no longer has to stay on guard all the time. It can finally rest. This transformation is both subtle and profound. You don't wake up one day healed. You start to notice little by little that you're reacting differently, that what used to trigger anxiety now causes only mild discomfort, that you're being kinder to yourself, that you're saying no without guilt, that you're looking in the mirror with more dignity. This is reconfiguration happening, not with noise but with consistency, not with magic promises but with real presence. Therapy doesn't change you. It reveals who you were before pain silenced you. And if you've made it this far, know this: the process has already begun. Your search for understanding, for balance, for truth is already changing your brain. because the simple act of reflecting, of listening to content like this with attention and openness, already activates your circuits of care, empathy, and self-awareness. And that is the beginning of healing. There is a quiet and deeply painful belief that haunts many people in psychological distress, the belief that they are broken, that something is wrong with their brain, their way of being, their very essence, that no matter how hard they try, they will never be like other people. This belief, though it seems born from pain, is fed by stigma, poorly explained diagnoses, traumatic experiences, and repeated failures to change. Slowly it crystallizes into an inner sentence, "I am beyond repair." But the truth, confirmed by modern neuroscience, is something entirely different and deeply liberating. There is no such thing as a permanently damaged brain. There is a brain in process, and every process can be rewritten. The idea of a brain doomed to repeat patterns of suffering ignores one of the most revolutionary principles in modern biology, neuroplasticity. The human brain can physically reshape itself in response to experience, emotion, learning, and connection. This means that even those who have endured severe trauma, developed major disorders, or lived for decades under the weight of emotional pain, still carry within them the capacity for change. What's often missing is not ability. It's a safe environment, consistent support, and time for transformation to unfold. In clinical practice, we see people arriving in therapy exhausted, skeptical, with histories of relapse, misdiagnoses, or medications that failed to bring relief. They believe the problem is within them, as if their brain were defective. But as sessions progress, as listening deepens and the therapeutic bond strengthens, something new begins to emerge. A clearer thought, an emotion named for the first time, a memory reinterpreted, a new choice made, however small. And each of these subtle changes is actually a new synapse forming, an emotional circuit being rewritten, a new path being paved in the mind. It's essential to understand that suffering does not mean you are damaged. It means you are on alert, in defense mode, in survival mode. A brain that responds with anxiety, apathy, or anger is not a dysfunctional brain. It is a brain that learned to protect itself from a world it once perceived as dangerous. But what has been learned can be unlearned. What was reinforced can be replaced. With patience, consistency, and care, the brain can be taught to relax, to trust, to love, and to create new ways of being. Science shows that even in severe clinical conditions, such as treatment-resistant depression, PTSD, or personality disorders, the brain still demonstrates potential for reorganization. New therapies based on emotional integration, somatic regulation, and memory reprocessing are showing us that pain is not a life sentence. It is information, a cry for help, a signal that something needs to be held, heard, and redefined. And this process cannot happen alone. While self-awareness is essential, deep healing happens through connection, because the brain learns through relationship. A baby doesn't learn to regulate emotion on its own. It needs a caregiver who holds, names, soothes. Similarly, an adult who has suffered, who has internalized pain, who has built protective walls around their heart, needs to be rediscovered through therapeutic relationship. When someone looks at you with empathy, when your story is validated, when you realize you no longer have to fight to be accepted, the brain responds. It breathes. It starts to trust again. This is one of the most powerful revelations of neuroscience. The human mind is plastic, adaptable, and capable of regeneration. And though suffering may have shaped your path, it doesn't have to be the end of the road. There is always another trail. Sometimes it begins with a simple, "I can't take this anymore." Other times with a quiet, "What if I try again?" What matters is the choice to continue, even without certainty, even with fear, even in pieces. You are not broken. You are under reconstruction. And reconstruction is an act of courage, not weakness. It means facing old wounds, re-examining your story, releasing burdens, and reprogramming your reactions. And with each step, no matter how small, your brain is responding. It's learning a new way to exist. And this learning, when held in compassion and consistency, becomes freedom. Imagine sitting in front of a screen, in a familiar space, maybe with headphones on and a cup of tea beside you, and suddenly feeling, to your surprise, that you're truly being heard. Without leaving the house, without traffic, without the discomfort of a waiting room. Just you, your story, and someone on the other side of the screen who is fully present, attentive, and available. This is the new reality of online therapy, a format that many doubted at first, but which is now becoming one of the greatest revolutions in emotional care in the 21st century. And not because it's simpler or more modern, but because it's breaking historical barriers of access, time, space, and stigma. For a long time, people believed that therapy could only work in person, with physical presence in the same room. That belief made sense in a time before we had the communication technologies we now rely on. But neuroscience and contemporary psychology show that what heals is not the location, it's the bond. And that bond, that deep emotional connection between therapist and client, can absolutely be formed through a screen. Empathic listening, emotional validation, the safe space to speak, all of that remains intact in the digital environment. And more than that, for many people, being in their own home actually increases their sense of emotional safety and openness. The effectiveness of online therapy is now supported by dozens of clinical studies which show results comparable to, in some cases even superior to, in-person therapy, especially in cases of anxiety, mild to moderate depression, phobias, stress, and emotional regulation difficulties. This is because the online format offers greater accessibility, continuity, and freedom. There's no need to commute, no major schedule rearrangements, no logistical stress. Sessions can happen on your time, in your space, at your pace, and that freedom itself is therapeutic. But the real revolution of online therapy is not just in convenience, it's in inclusion. People who never had access to psychotherapy before, whether because they live in small towns, have physical limitations, feel uncomfortable leaving the house, or carry shame about seeking help, can now, with a single click, find real, safe, and ongoing psychological support. Technology is democratizing emotional care. It's putting in each person's hands the opportunity to listen to themselves, understand themselves, and begin healing. And that changes everything. Because when care reaches those who need it most, suffering is no longer invisible. Online therapy also creates a new kind of bond, more direct, more continuous, more aligned with modern life. In many cases, there's a stronger commitment to the therapeutic process, precisely because it better fits the patient's routine. Over time, a new kind of intimacy develops, one that doesn't depend on physical presence but on emotional presence, on the gaze that travels through the screen, on the listening that goes beyond the sound. The quality of the therapeutic relationship remains the most powerful agent of change, and it stays alive, strong, and transformative in the virtual setting. Of course, like any advancement, online therapy also requires responsibility. Confidentiality, ethics, and professional preparation remain essential pillars. That's why it's important to choose licensed therapists with experience in this format and the sensitivity to navigate the subtleties of digital communication. The quality of the space, lighting, sound, privacy, also shapes the emotional experience. But when these elements are handled with care, they don't diminish the depth of the session. On the contrary, they can even enhance it. Many people who began online therapy during the pandemic, for example, say that it was during that global crisis that they found a space for themselves for the first time, and they've continued ever since, because they discovered that the screen is not a barrier. It's a bridge from pain to comfort, from confusion to clarity, from chaos to the possibility of reorganization, from loneliness to genuine human connection. So if you've ever hesitated about online therapy, if you've thought it's not the same or wondered if it would really work for you, allow yourself to reconsider, because what may be missing isn't physical presence, but emotional presence. And that online therapy can provide with all the power of true human listening, wherever you are, however you are, in whatever way you can. At first glance, it might seem strange to think that a simple image square on a screen could carry the symbolic weight of a transformative encounter, but it does. In the context of online therapy, the camera is not just a technological lens, it becomes an emotional portal, a kind of window through which care transcends distance, dissolves absence, and holds vulnerability. It's there in that digitally framed space that you find an attentive gaze, a silent listening, a reflection of yourself that you may have never dared to face before. And that space, however virtual it may seem, becomes profoundly real. When you log into an online session and see your therapist's face appear on the screen, something powerful begins to unfold. The human brain, even in virtual settings, recognizes facial expressions, tone of voice, pauses and gestures as signals of connection. Studies show that the brain regions responsible for empathy, bonding, and emotional regulation are also activated in digital encounters, especially when there is authentic presence and intention. In other words, the therapeutic bond crosses the screen, because what connects two people is not physical touch, but the emotional quality of presence between them. Often, it is in this online space that a client feels comfortable enough to fully show up for the very first time. The intimacy of being in one's own home, having control over the camera, being surrounded by personal and meaningful objects, all of this contributes to a sense of enhanced safety. Vulnerability, when born in a safe environment, transforms into strength, and the screen, once seen as a barrier, reveals itself as a sacred stage for reconnection with the self. Interestingly, in some cases, physical distance can help reduce emotional barriers. For people with trauma histories, social phobia, intense shyness, or abandonment issues, the online format can ease the fear of direct contact, allowing trust to grow more gradually. The camera becomes a kind of intermediate space, not full exposure, not complete isolation, where emotional openness can be paced according to safety. And when that openness unfolds, the impact is real. The transformation is real, because the brain doesn't differentiate between physical and emotional presence. It responds to what is felt as true. In therapeutic practice, we see this often. Gazes meeting on a screen that speak more than words could, silences that hold the same weight digitally as they would in person, tears that fall in front of the camera and don't need to be stopped, only received. In many cases, the very act of seeing oneself on screen during a session helps the client recognize expressions, emotions, and reactions that once went unnoticed, as if the camera also served as a mirror. And mirrors don't just reflect, they reveal. Of course, there are challenges: unstable connections, background noise, technical glitches. These are part of the experience, but when approached with gentleness and understanding, these disruptions don't cancel the depth of the encounter. On the contrary, they reinforce the humanity of the process. Therapy is not a perfect script. It's a living process, made of imperfections that, when embraced, become part of the healing. And the camera in this context is just another tool. What truly matters is what always has: presence, listening, the truth of the meeting. Over time, many clients come to associate the therapy screen with an internal place of safety. When they open their camera, they're not just connecting with the therapist, they're connecting with themselves, their story, their pain, and their hope. The digital image becomes a ritual, an anchor, a reminder that it's possible to pause, look inward, and feel held, even amid chaos, even from afar, even with all the noise outside. And so, session after session, the screen stops being just a piece of technology and becomes something far deeper, a space where the invisible is seen, where the inaudible is heard, where the intangible is touched, even if only metaphorically. And that, in itself, is a daily miracle of online psychotherapy. For a long time, seeking therapy was seen as a sign of weakness, a confession of failure, a last resort for those who couldn't handle things on their own. This narrative, although subtle, was reinforced for decades in families, schools, churches, workplaces, and even within traditional medicine. People would hear things like, "That's for crazy people. You just need willpower. Washing your dirty laundry with a stranger won't help." The result? Thousands of people suffered in silence. They learned to hide their pain, swallow their tears, and pretend to function while their inner world was collapsing. But times are changing, and it is urgent to say, repeat, and shout if needed. Therapy is for everyone, and it is not a sign of weakness. It is an act of courage. In truth, seeking psychological help should be approached with the same care and normalcy as going to the doctor when you feel physical pain. After all, emotional suffering also makes us sick. It also paralyzes. It also kills. And when left untreated, it spreads in the form of insomnia, exhaustion, psychosomatic illnesses, panic attacks, addictions, compulsions, and dysfunctional relationships. What begins as sadness or anxiety can turn into a deep existential void, often preventable. Psychotherapy, when entered with openness and continuity, has the power to stop that cycle. It acts as a brake on silent suffering, a space to reorganize the mind before it collapses. But for more people to access this form of healing, we need to dismantle the stigma. And that starts with language. Therapy is not nonsense, it's not a trend, it's not for the rich or people with too much free time. Therapy is a tool, it is reconstruction. It is emotional re-education for a society that for far too long was taught not to feel. And it doesn't matter who you are, man, woman, young, elderly, successful, professional, artist, homemaker, student, parent, grandparent, everyone has a story worth being heard. Everyone has wounds that deserve healing. Everyone has emotions that deserve to be held. There's an even deeper rooted stigma within some groups. Men, for example. Many were raised to believe that real men don't cry, that showing emotion is weakness, and that asking for help is failure. The result is an alarmingly high rate of male suicide, substance abuse, aggressive behavior, and emotional breakdowns that could have been prevented with safe spaces for listening and support. In this context, therapy becomes an act of resistance against a culture that taught us to hide our souls. It's also important to say, you don't have to hit rock bottom to seek help. Therapy isn't only for those in crisis. It's also for those who want to better understand themselves, improve relationships, make conscious decisions, heal old wounds, and build a life with more purpose. The earlier you start, the more preventive the process becomes. And that's emotional intelligence, not waiting to fall apart before rebuilding, but choosing to strengthen before the storm hits. Another crucial point is that there is no shame in needing ongoing support. Mental health care is a lifelong commitment. Just as we do physical checkups, adjust our diet, or return to exercise after periods of inactivity, we can and should return to therapy whenever we feel disconnected from ourselves. The search for balance is constant. There is no final destination in healing. There is a continuous process of presence, awareness, and evolution. By choosing therapy, you're sending a powerful message to your brain, your history, and your body. I deserve care. That decision, often made in silence, is one of the most revolutionary and loving acts a person can do for themselves. It's like breaking a generational cycle of unspoken pain. It's like opening a clearing in life's dense forest to breathe with authenticity. And when you choose this path, you're not just healing yourself, you're healing those around you, because a peaceful mind becomes a fertile ground for kindness, presence, and transformation. So never feel like you're less for needing help. Never be ashamed of your tears. Never compare yourself to someone who hasn't yet had the courage to truly listen to themselves. The fact that you're here, engaging with this content, is already proof that you are moving, and movement is life. In difficult times, when the mind feels suffocated by heavy thoughts and the body walks as if carrying the weight of decades, the word hope can sound distant, naive, or even unattainable. But what you may have never heard, and what neuroscience now clearly affirms, is that hoping for something good is not just an emotional act. It is a real, measurable brain phenomenon. Hope, when cultivated consciously and deeply, activates specific neural networks, strengthens areas linked to motivation, regulates stress, and literally alters the biochemistry of suffering. Believe it. Believing transforms. Genuine hope, not blind optimism, but the kind that arises from the intention to keep going even without guarantees, has a tangible impact on the brain. Neuroimaging studies show that people who nurture positive expectations for the future activate the ventromedial prefrontal cortex somewhat more intensely, an area directly linked to emotional regulation, planning, and decision-making. This region is also connected to the limbic system, which processes emotions like fear, sadness, and pleasure. This means that when you allow yourself to believe there is a way out, even in the midst of chaos, your brain then starts to reorganize itself toward action, creativity, and renewal. This is not about empty optimism. It's about a neurobiological readiness that supports recovery. When hope is present, the brain releases neurotransmitters like dopamine and endorphins, which reduce pain perception, increase physical and emotional energy, and generate an internal breathing space that protects us from total collapse. This protective state is essential for thinking clearly, making decisions, and seeking help. In contrast, hopelessness activates regions associated with pain and helplessness, such as the anterior insula and the cingulate cortex, leading to a sense of paralysis, withdrawal, and often profound apathy. That's why, in psychotherapy, the simple act of imagining a possible future already has a healing effect. When a therapist asks, "What if there were another path?" they're not just sparking reflection, they're lighting, within the patient's brain, a spark of neural reorganization. That spark may be small, but it's enough to begin. And once it's lit, it needs to be fed, with small choices, with words of kindness, with personal commitments, with daily acts of self-care, no matter how small they may seem. Hope can also be taught. It doesn't depend on external circumstances. It can be built internally, like a muscle that grows stronger with use. You can train it, practice it, call it forth. And it begins with the way you speak to yourself, with the thoughts you nurture, with the stories you choose to repeat. The way you narrate your life has power. A brain that hears "this will never work" every day becomes wired for defensiveness, withdrawal, and paralysis. But a brain fed with phrases like "it's hard but not impossible," "I'm in process," or "I can start over as many times as I need," begins to respond with greater flexibility and resilience. That is the power of hope. It doesn't need to be ready. It can be planted. It doesn't need to be intense, just consistent. It doesn't need guarantees and only openness. And it can show up in the simplest of forms, in a request for help, a moment of pause to breathe, an email sent to schedule a first therapy session, or even a video like this which, even from afar, already creates a space for reorganization. Sometimes, hope begins with the smallest gesture, but grows until it becomes a path. And this is where science meets the soul, in realizing that what keeps us standing is not the absence of pain, but the presence of meaning. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, once said, "Those who have a why can bear almost any how." And today, neuroscience confirms it. Having purpose, having connection, having hope, protects the brain against emotional illness. Not because the pain disappears, but because we learn to endure it with meaning. You don't have to believe everything will change tomorrow, but you can begin by believing that you deserve to change, that it is possible to live differently, that even if it still hurts, there is a part of you, perhaps silent, perhaps forgotten, that still wants to bloom. And that part is alive. It's there. It's listening now. And it shows itself in this moment when you, even with doubts, choose to keep listening, choose to keep going. There is an almost invisible force that governs much of human suffering: disconnection from the present, the mind that ruminates on the past, replaying old wounds, unresolved traumas, scenes that have already ended but remain alive in memory as if still happening, or the mind that projects into the future, filled with anxiety, fear, catastrophic anticipation, trying to control what doesn't yet exist. The result is always the same. The present moment is lost. The body is here, but awareness is elsewhere. And this misalignment, when it becomes chronic, damages the brain, fragments identity, and blocks emotional regeneration. That's why one of the deepest purposes of therapy, though not always spoken aloud, is to reteach us how to be present. Presence is a practice, and like any practice, it requires training, patience, and kindness. When we're in a therapy session, and the therapist invites us to notice our body, breathe more consciously, observe what we feel without judgment, they are, in fact, activating specific neural networks that strengthen emotional self-regulation. These networks involve areas like the medial prefrontal cortex, the insula, and the cingulate cortex, regions that help us sense what's happening inside, name emotions, and respond to stimuli with more flexibility rather than automatic reactivity. This is one of the most important discoveries of recent decades. The practice of mindfulness, also known as present moment awareness, changes the brain. Naming emotions as they arise, feeling the body without trying to change it, accepting the now as it is, all of that strengthens neural circuits associated with well-being, empathy, compassion, and mental clarity. And the more you practice, the more accessible those neural pathways become. It's like carving a new trail through the dense forest of the mind. At first it's difficult, but with time it becomes the most natural path. Therapy is the ideal environment for that training, because there you can experience presence in a safe way. You can observe your own thoughts without identifying with them. You can say, "I'm scared," without being consumed by fear. You can look inward without getting lost. And this ongoing exercise of bringing the mind back to the now, of quieting the internal noise, of allowing yourself to feel without immediately reacting, is profoundly therapeutic. More than any insight, it is presence that heals. Because in presence, you truly hear yourself. The brain, when trained to stay in the now, shifts from survival mode to integration mode. It stops scanning for threats and begins searching for balance. The nervous system slows down, breathing deepens, cortisol levels drop, attention widens, and in that state, things that once seemed impossible to face, grief, guilt, a decision, a trauma, can now be met with more clarity, more courage, and more compassion. The pain doesn't disappear, but it finds space, and where there is space, there is healing. Being present is also an act of love, a gesture that says, "I care about myself now," not just about who I was, not just about who I want to become, but about who I am, here, breathing, existing, trying, because the present moment is the only place where change can truly happen. The past is gone, the future hasn't arrived, but the now, this now, is fertile ground for a new beginning. In this instant, you can choose to breathe more slowly. You can relax your shoulders. You can close your eyes and feel your body. You can say to yourself, "I'm here," and that is enough. And even if your mind wants to escape, and it will, you can bring it back, as many times as needed. Presence doesn't demand perfection. It demands repetition. And each time you return, you are teaching your brain that being with yourself is safe. That feeling is possible. That truly living is more than surviving. It's finding yourself inside the moment. Therapy, in this sense, is a weekly rehearsal of presence. And the more you practice it in session, the more that presence extends into other areas of life, into relationships, decisions, pauses, and silences. And little by little, you notice you're less on autopilot, less reactive, more whole, and closer to yourself. Never before has mental health been so prominent. Never before have we talked so much, published so much, searched so much, and yet never before has psychological suffering felt so collective, so silent, and so difficult to treat in depth. Amid this contradiction, a new landscape of care has emerged. Digital clinics, therapeutic apps, automated platforms, and AI-based counseling. What recently seemed unthinkable is now the most accessible, immediate, and, for many, the only open door to psychological support. But how should we interpret this new scenario? Are we trivializing therapy, or are we finally democratizing access to emotional care? To understand this phenomenon, we must acknowledge an uncomfortable truth. Traditional psychotherapy has never been accessible to all. For decades, psychological care was limited to those with time, money, structure, and, often, a certain level of cultural capital. For many, therapy was a distant privilege. But emotional pain does not care about social class, zip code, or academic degree. It silently invades life without asking permission, and it was this collective urgency, combined with the technological revolution, that created the new normal of psychological care. More digital, faster, more adaptable, more available. Online clinics with appointments in minutes, apps offering message-based support, platforms with 24/7 psychologists, artificial intelligences that guide self-knowledge. All of this is transforming how we understand and practice mental health. And while there are risks, limits, and superficialities in this model, there are also deep opportunities for transformation. Because when care stops being a luxury and becomes a real possibility, millions of people stop suffering alone. The pandemic accelerated this process. Suddenly, everyone, even the most resistant, had to try the digital environment. And what we witnessed was surprising. The therapeutic relationship remained alive, even through small screens. Sessions were still profound, emotions still valid, transformations still real. And this paved the way for something even greater, the idea that emotional care can, and should, exist in many formats, for many profiles, with many levels of access. That is inclusion. That is emotional public health. But there's a key point. The more digital care becomes, the more we need to cultivate human presence. No app replaces the empathetic gaze of a therapist. No automated platform can hold someone's tears with the same humanity as real listening. That's why technology should be seen as a tool for expansion, not substitution. It brings us closer, it organizes, it speeds up. But what truly transforms is still the bond, the trust, the creation of a space where you can be, feel, and truly listen to yourself. And within this new ecosystem, new profiles of therapists are also emerging. Professionals who understand the demands of modern life, who speak the language of younger generations, who are not afraid of technology, but use it with ethics and sensitivity, who welcome both urgency and silence with empathy, who know that emotional care needs to be deep, but it also needs to be possible. And today, being possible often means fitting into someone's schedule, budget, and reality. The democratization of psychological care means recognizing that not everyone can, wants, or needs long, weekly, in-person sessions. Some people just need a safe space for a one-time outpouring. Some benefit from guided self-awareness paths through apps. Some, after a conversation with a chatbot, gain the strength to seek out a human therapist. Some do both. And all of this can coexist, as long as the focus remains the same: to care for mental health with responsibility, humanity, and depth. The new normal of psychotherapy is not a threat. It is an opportunity, a chance to reinvent how we listen to ourselves, how we hold the pain of others, and how we build real, even if digital, support networks. Because in the end, what we all seek is both simple and immense, a place where we can be who we are without fear, without shame, without having to pretend to be strong all the time. And if that place fits in the palm of our hand, then let it be welcome. Have you ever stopped to think about how the simple act of being looked at with tenderness can transform your entire day? How a single hug can silence a whirlwind of thoughts? How a genuine conversation can begin to reorganize everything inside you that once felt lost? Science is now confirming what the soul has always known. We were not born for emotional isolation. The human brain is by nature relational. It develops through connection, matures through bonding, and becomes ill in the absence of affection. We are networks of flesh and memory, shaped by other networks, of touch, of words, of presence. And when those networks fail or break, the pain we feel is more than symbolic. It is physical, chemical, neurological. From a neuroscience perspective, every meaningful relationship you build, whether with friends, family, partners, therapists, or even pets, activates complex systems in your brain. Healthy human contact stimulates the release of oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, responsible for generating sensations of trust, calm, and safety. Alongside it comes a reduction in cortisol, the stress hormone, and an activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, the one responsible for rest, digestion, and repair. In other words, being with someone in a loving way literally heals you. But this ability to connect doesn't arise out of nowhere. It is learned, and often it is also wounded. People who grew up in cold, neglectful, violent, or unpredictable environments develop brains that remain in a constant state of alert, as if any emotional closeness were a potential threat. This doesn't mean these people are incapable of love or trust. It simply means that their nervous systems were wired to protect before opening up. And this is where psychotherapy becomes a space of reprogramming. By experiencing a safe, stable, and empathetic relationship, the brain gradually begins to understand that it is possible to be in connection without disappearing, without being hurt, without getting lost. Human relationships, when healthy, work as external emotional regulators. When you're emotionally disorganized and someone listens to you with calm presence, your brain starts to reorganize itself too. This is called co-regulation, a biological process in which the nervous systems of two people come into sync, allowing states of tension to dissolve in the presence of the other's calm. That's why a calm therapist can soothe an anxious client. That's why a genuine conversation can sometimes be more effective than a pill. That's why affection heals. But the opposite is also true. Abusive, cold, distant, or ambiguous relationships directly affect how the brain functions. The pain of social rejection, for instance, activates the same areas in the brain as physical pain. Repeated abandonment leaves imprints in the neural networks linked to self-esteem, belonging, and the ability to trust. This is why emotional healing almost always involves one rewriting the way we relate, not just with others, but with ourselves, because the quality of our external relationships often mirrors the state of our internal relationship. In this sense, learning to be with another is also an exercise in being with yourself. When you allow yourself to be seen, heard, and accepted without a mask, you're telling your brain, "I can exist as I am." And when you offer that to another person, you're saying, "You can be and I will stay." This is how we create true emotional networks. Networks that hold, that listen, that don't try to fix but stay present. And this act of staying, in a world of fleeting ties and constant distractions, is deeply therapeutic. So do not underestimate the power of your relationships, and don't believe you have to heal everything alone. We are social beings. We are made to be with. And when you allow yourself to love and be loved truthfully, you activate neural circuits that foster healing, resilience, and meaning. You are telling your body, "We are no longer alone." And the body listens. The brain responds. The soul begins to bloom. It's common to believe that major emotional change requires major action, but neuroscience is increasingly clear. The human brain responds more strongly to repetition than to intensity. In other words, what shapes your mind is not what you do once with great emotion, but what you do every day, with presence, consistency, and intention. In this light, self-soothing and emotional regulation routines become powerful tools for restoring inner balance, reducing psychological suffering, and rewiring the brain circuits associated with pain, fear, and inner chaos. When we speak of self-soothing, we're referring to the practice of looking at yourself with kindness, respect, and true listening. It's the ability to recognize what you feel without judgment, to offer yourself what you'd offer a dear friend, a pause, a symbolic hug, a space free of demands. For the brain, this has immediate impact. Self-compassion practices activate brain areas related to the reward system and emotional relaxation, while deactivating centers linked to self-criticism, like the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex. This means that being kind to yourself isn't just nice. It's biologically necessary for healing. But how does this become routine? It starts simply. Wake up and take 2 minutes to listen to your body before rushing into the day. Ask questions like, "How am I feeling today?" or "What does my body need right now?" This small gesture activates the body-mind connection and sets the tone for a present-centered day. Throughout the day, build in unintentional pauses, even brief ones, to break the automatic flow and give your nervous system a chance to recalibrate. Take 3 deep breaths between tasks, stretch your shoulders, blink slowly, drink water mindfully. Repeated daily, these small actions teach your brain to step out of constant alert mode. Another powerful routine is emotional labeling. Naming what you feel reduces the intensity of the emotion and increases inner clarity. Instead of saying, "I feel bad," try, "I feel frustrated, I feel tired, I feel afraid." This naming process activates the prefrontal cortex and helps integrate emotional experiences more healthily. Along with that, practice regulating self-talk. Short, truthful phrases spoken inwardly, such as, "This will pass," "I'm doing my best," "I deserve to rest." Over time, these phrases become neural pathways that support the emotional self through hard moments. You can also use sensory anchors, objects, sounds, smells, or images that evoke calm, safety, or belonging. A soft scent, a soothing song, dim lighting, a repeated mantra. The brain becomes familiar with these associations and, when exposed to them, naturally shifts into regulation. This is especially helpful during moments of crisis when inner chaos threatens to take over. Having these anchors ready is like building inner sanctuaries you can access anywhere, anytime. And when we talk about nervous system regulation, we must include the body. The brain doesn't regulate with thoughts alone. It regulates through movement. Walking, dancing, deep breathing, stretching, or even lying on the ground and feeling the pull of gravity are all ways to signal to the brain, "We are safe now." The nervous system responds to touch, rhythm, and sway. And it is possible to turn the body into an ally, not a battlefield. This kind of regulation is especially effective for those who have experienced trauma or live in a state of chronic alert. These practices, repeated day after day, create new internal routes to safety. And the beauty is, they don't depend on perfect external conditions. They can happen anywhere, even on hard days. They tell your brain, "I'm here for you." And when that phrase becomes a habit, everything changes, because a brain that feels safe stops fighting and starts to bloom. You don't have to wait for life to calm down to start caring for yourself. Care itself can be the path back to balance. Small gestures, small rituals, small breaths. They are like seeds, and when planted with consistency, they transform the mind, the body, and the very way you exist in the world. Have you ever heard the phrase, "change comes from the inside out"? It's more than a motivational cliché. It's an accurate description of how deep emotional transformation works through the lens of neuroscience. True personal revolution doesn't just happen in your thoughts or intentions. It begins in the body, in the nerves, in the silent circuits that connect mind, emotion, and survival. And the starting point of this revolution is the same for everyone: the autonomic nervous system, the invisible conductor that regulates our internal state and determines whether we're ready to love, think, and grow, or whether we need to run, fight, or shut down. The nervous system is divided into two main branches: the sympathetic, responsible for the fight or flight response, and the parasympathetic, responsible for rest, digestion, and regeneration. In moments of chronic stress, trauma, or repeated emotional pain, the sympathetic system takes over. The body enters a state of alert, the mind races, muscles tighten, and reality is filtered as a threat. Many people live years, even their whole lives, in this state without realizing it. It's as if they're trapped in a body at war, and in this state, the brain does not learn, does not love, does not create, it only survives. Transformation, therefore, begins when the nervous system feels safe. And this doesn't happen through rational arguments, it happens through consistent, embodied, and emotional experiences of care. In this context, therapy is much more than a conversation. It is a space for nervous system re-education. Every time you're heard with empathy, validated in your pain, invited to breathe more deeply, embraced even in your silences, your nervous system receives a new message. This is not like before. Now, it is safe. And the brain, like a child who realizes they can finally rest in trusted arms, begins to soften, to open, to reorganize. This reorganization is slow, but it's real. The vagus nerve, the main driver of the parasympathetic system, begins to activate more frequently. Heart rate slows, cortisol levels drop, the immune system strengthens, emotions become more accessible but less overwhelming, and you start to notice that you can make decisions more clearly, receive criticism with less defensiveness, and face frustrations with greater stability. Not because life has changed, but because your internal state has. This is neural transformation. This is emotional evolution. And the most powerful thing about this revolution is that it's cumulative. Every small act of self-regulation, a conscious breath, a self-care ritual, a firm no, a tear shed without shame, is a vote in favor of a new internal reality. The brain learns through repetition, and the nervous system, when it repeatedly feels safe, begins to rewrite the triggers, the impulses, and the emotional maps that once seemed unchangeable. Trauma begins to lose ground. Fear begins to lose its voice. The body becomes a home again, not a battlefield. That doesn't mean pain disappears, but it does mean that our pain no longer dominates. It's still felt, but now it can be witnessed with presence. It still hurts, but no longer paralyzes, because something profound has changed. You are no longer a hostage to your nervous system. You've learned to lead it, with respect, with care, with truth, and that autonomy is true power. The power to stop reacting on autopilot. The power to choose your response. The power to no longer be the frightened child trapped in an adult body, but to be the adult who now protects the child who once had no support. This revolution is invisible to the eyes, but it changes everything around you, because a regulated nervous system impacts every one of your relationships, decisions, and perceptions. You start speaking with more kindness, working with more focus, resting with more depth, loving with more presence, living with more truth. And all because at some point, you chose to listen to your body, care for your mind, develop new habits, and you come home to yourself. This is the inner revolution. It's not magical, it's not instant, but it's real. And it's happening right now, as you breathe, as you reflect, as you allow yourself to keep going. Your nervous system is listening, and everything within you is beginning to change. We've arrived at the quietest and perhaps the deepest moment of this journey, the closing. And unlike what many believe, ending a therapeutic process, whether it's a session, a chapter, or a phase of life, is not a full stop. It is a sacred comma. It's the necessary pause that allows what was lived to be absorbed, digested, and integrated. Because true transformation doesn't happen at the peak of emotion, but in the in-between, in the space between what was and what is yet to come. It is in the pause that the brain reintegrates. It is in the pause that the heart reconnects. It is in the pause that the soul finds new meaning. At this moment, your body holds more than it did at the beginning of this session. It holds words that touched old memories, ideas that lit up hidden patterns, emotions that surfaced with a permission they may have never received before. It also holds the experience of being heard, even in silence, of hearing yourself, of sensing that you are not alone in what you feel, and that in itself is healing in motion. Ending with presence is different from simply finishing. A true closing comes with a symbolic gesture, with integration, with reverence for what was lived. So now I invite you to gather everything that was awakened in this session and turn it into affirmations, seeds that, if nurtured, will bloom over time. You don't need to believe all of them right now. You only need to allow them to be spoken, because the brain listens, the body stores, and the soul, even when wounded, recognizes when it's touched with truth. Repeat the following affirmations silently or in a soft voice, not as magic formulas, but as gentle invitations to a new relationship with yourself. I am not what happened to me. I am the one who chooses what to do with what happened. My nervous system can learn to trust again, and I can teach it with care and presence. I can allow myself to feel without fear, because to feel is to be alive, and being alive is my right. Even when pain seems to return, I remember I am no longer the same, and I can make new choices. My mind is not my enemy. It is fertile ground, and I can tend to what grows within it. Each conscious breath is an act of self-love. Each pause is a new beginning. I can be the home I never had. I can be the embrace I once missed. I can be my own shelter. There is no rush, no demand. I am in process, and that is enough. Breathe. Let these words echo inside you. Some may resonate instantly, others may meet resistance. That's okay. What matters is that you made it here, that you gifted yourself the grace of staying, that in the midst of a busy world, you chose yourself, and that changes everything. You might not feel the change right now. It might still seem distant, confusing, heavy, but trust. What has been touched will not be lost. What has been seen will not be repressed. What has been felt will not be erased. It's all still there, germinating. And before you know it, you'll realize something inside you has already begun to bloom. You can return to this session whenever you need. You can revisit it with new eyes, pause it, resume it. The pace of healing is not linear. It's a spiral. It's alive. It's yours. And to close, I leave you with one final reminder, not as a promise, but as a possibility. You don't need to be ready. You only need to be present. The rest life will make bloom.